Midnight. A concrete bunker buried beneath the forests outside Moscow. Fluorescent lights hum over a wall of glowing screens, and one man sits in a chair that suddenly feels far too small for the weight of what it holds. An alarm tears through the silence. Red letters explode across the main display. Launch, launch, launch. The computer is certain. According to its satellite warning system, 5 American intercontinental ballistic missiles have been launched from the United States. If the system is right, they are already racing towards Soviet territory. Within minutes, they could strike. And under the rules written long before this night, the response is supposed to be immediate, overwhelming, and irreversible. The man's finger hovers over the phone that connects him directly to the Soviet high command. One call, one report, one decision. That is all it could take to set a full-scale nuclear retaliation in motion. He doesn't make the call. What happened inside that bunker on September 26, 1983, has since been called one of the most extraordinary untold stories of the Cold War. A night when the fate of the modern world rested on the judgment of a single, exhausted lieutenant colonel almost nobody had ever heard of. His name was Stanislav Petrov. For years, his government ordered him to remain silent. The incident was classified, the records hidden, and the man at the center of it quietly returned to everyday life, while the world remained unaware of how close it may have come to catastrophe. But one haunting question has never disappeared. What if he had trusted the machine instead of his instincts? This is the story of the man who looked nuclear war in the face and chose to question the computer that everyone else believed. If stories like this deserve to be remembered, they deserve to be shared. Subscribe now, because this channel is dedicated to uncovering the forgotten history, hidden truths, and remarkable people who quietly changed the course of the world. To understand why one man's decision mattered so much, you have to understand the world that built him. By the early 1980s, the Cold War had entered its coldest stretch in years. The Soviet Union and the United States were not simply rivals. They were two civilizations standing on opposite sides of a loaded gun, each certain the other was ready to fire first. Just weeks earlier, Soviet fighter jets had shot down a civilian airliner, Korean Airlines Flight 007, killing 269 people after it drifted into restricted Soviet airspace. Washington called it a massacre. Moscow called it self-defense. Trust between the two superpowers, already thin, had nearly vanished. Inside the Kremlin, paranoia was setting in. Soviet leadership had convinced itself that the United States might be preparing a surprise nuclear first strike, a belief so entrenched that a secret intelligence operation, codenamed Ryan, had been created specifically to watch for early warning signs of an American attack. The pressure on every Soviet officer connected to nuclear defense was enormous. Mistakes were not tolerated. Hesitation was treated as failure. This was the atmosphere Stanislav Petrov worked inside. Petrov was not a soldier in the way people imagine soldiers. He was an engineer by training, a man who trusted logic and precision more than instinct or fear. He had helped design parts of the very early warning system he now worked within, the Soviet Union's Oko satellite network, built to detect the launch of American missiles the instant they left the ground. He understood its strengths. He also understood, better than almost anyone else in that bunker, its weaknesses. He was 44 years old. He had a wife, Raisa, and 2 children waiting for him at home in the town of Friazino. On the night that would define the rest of his life, he was not even supposed to be on duty. He was covering a shift for a colleague. It was just past midnight when the alarms began. The command center at Serpukhov 15 was built for exactly one purpose: to give the Soviet Union advance warning if American missiles were ever launched toward its territory. Rows of screens tracked satellite data streaming in from high above the Earth, watching the United States around the clock. If the system detected a launch, it would sound the alarm, and the information would be passed up the chain of command within minutes. Minutes that could decide whether the Soviet Union launched a retaliatory strike before American warheads ever arrived. At 12:15 a.m., the siren went off. The screen showed a single word repeated in blinking red letters: launch. The satellite system reported that an American missile silo in Montana had just fired an intercontinental ballistic missile directly at Soviet territory. For a moment, the room went still. Petrov's job in that instant was simple on paper and unbearable in practice. His duty was to confirm the alert and pass it up the chain of command to the generals and ultimately to the desk of the Soviet leadership, who would then decide whether to launch a retaliatory nuclear strike against the United States. He stared at the screen. One missile. Something about it didn't sit right with him. If they were really attacking, he would later recall thinking, they wouldn't send just one missile. They'd send everything. A single missile made no strategic sense. A real American first strike, in Petrov's understanding of military doctrine, would be overwhelming. Dozens, even hundreds of missiles fired at once to cripple the Soviet Union's ability to respond. One missile looked less like the beginning of a war and more like a mistake. But before he could settle on that thought, the alarm sounded again, and again, and again. Within moments, the system was reporting not one missile, but 5. A full-scale launch, exactly the kind of overwhelming strike Petrov had just told himself wouldn't come as a single missile. The screen at the front of the command center flashed its highest level warning. A missile attack was underway, and the system rated its own confidence in the data as maximum certainty. Around him, junior officers froze. Sirens blared through the concrete corridors. Somewhere above them, and around the world, the fate of millions of lives had just been reduced to a blinking light and a countdown. Petrov had, by his own later account, somewhere between 12 and 15 minutes before those missiles, if they were real, would begin striking Soviet territory. And in that window, he had to make a decision that no algorithm, no manual, and no training exercise had ever truly prepared him for. He picked up the phone to the duty officer on the other end of the chain of command. "This is Petrov," he said. "I am reporting a false alarm." He had no proof. He had a feeling, the trained instinct of an engineer who understood the system he was reporting on, and who understood that the story the machine was telling him didn't add up. If you've ever had to make a split-second decision where every option felt impossible, imagine making that decision with the weight of the entire world sitting on your shoulders. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in that chair? The clock did not stop for Petrov's doubts. Soviet military protocol was built around a chilling logic known as launch on warning. The idea was simple and terrifying. If the enemy's missiles were detected, the Soviet Union could not afford to wait for them to actually land before responding, because by then, it might be too late to retaliate at all. The moment the system confirmed an attack, the expectation was to alert command immediately, so a counterstrike could be prepared before the incoming warheads even touched the ground. Petrov's superiors were waiting for his confirmation. The system itself, the most advanced early warning technology the Soviet Union possessed, was telling him with its highest rating of certainty that nuclear missiles were in the air. Every piece of his training told him to pass the alert forward and let the generals decide. Instead, he sat with the decision alone. He later described the feeling as something close to sitting in a hot frying pan, the sensation of every second passing, while the weight of an impossible choice pressed down on him. If he was wrong, and the missiles were real, his hesitation could cost the Soviet Union the ability to respond in time, potentially altering the entire outcome of the war before it even began. If he was wrong the other way, if he raised the alarm and there was no attack, he could be the man who triggered a nuclear war that didn't need to happen. He weighed what he knew. The satellite system was new, recently installed, and had a history of quirks he understood intimately because he had helped build it. ground-based radar, which would have offered a second method of confirming an actual missile launch, showed nothing. No radar returns, no visual confirmation, just the satellite data, insisting with total confidence that missiles were incoming. And there was the detail that never stopped nagging at him. The numbers didn't fit the shape of a real war. A genuine American first strike, launched with the intention of crippling the Soviet Union before it could respond, would not look like this. It would not trickle in as one, then a pause, then four more. It would be everything at once. Minutes ticked by. Somewhere above the Soviet Union, if the machine was telling the truth, warheads carrying more destructive power than every bomb dropped in the Second World War combined were falling toward cities filled with sleeping families. Petrov made his choice again. He told the officers monitoring the situation with him that this was, in his judgment, a false alarm. A malfunction, not an attack. He reported it up the chain as exactly that, an error in the system, not an act of war. And then, there was nothing left to do but wait for the missiles to either arrive or not. The minutes stretched unbearably. Every second without impact was a second that supported his theory. Every second was also a second where, if he was wrong, it was already too late to undo the silence he had chosen. 23 minutes after the first alarm, the time had passed during which any real missiles would have already struck Soviet soil. Nothing happened. No explosions. No mushroom clouds rising over Soviet cities. No war. Stanislav Petrov had been right. In the days that followed, investigators worked to understand exactly what had gone wrong. The answer, when it came, was almost absurdly simple compared to the catastrophe it had nearly caused. The OCO satellite system had mistaken sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds above Montana for the heat signature of a missile launch. A rare alignment of sunlight, satellite positioning, and cloud cover had tricked the machine into reporting a launch that never happened. It was not sabotage. It was not a glitch planted by an enemy. It was an error born from the impossible complexity of trying to watch an entire hemisphere for the first flicker of nuclear war. Petrov had been right, not because he had access to secret information the machine didn't have, but because he had trusted human judgment over a system's false certainty at the exact moment when doing so meant risking everything. If the story ended there, it might already be remembered as an act of quiet heroism. Instead, what happened next made it something closer to a betrayal. Petrov was not praised. He was not decorated. He was, instead, quietly reprimanded, in part for failing to keep complete written logs during the crisis. Logs he had not filled out because he had spent every one of those 12 unbearable minutes on the phone, making the decision that would determine whether the Cold War turned hot. His superiors, embarrassed by the failure of a system the Soviet military had trusted completely, had little interest in publicly admitting how close they had come to launching a retaliatory nuclear strike based on sunlight bouncing off clouds. Soon after, Petrov was quietly transferred out of his position. He eventually left military service altogether, worked for a time at the very institute that had built the flawed satellite system, and lived a private life that gave no outward sign of the world he had once saved. For years, almost no one outside a small circle of Soviet officials knew what had happened that night in September of 1983. He did not speak about it. Officially, he could not. The entire event was classified. Unofficially, there was little glory in a story where the truth was that the Soviet Union's most advanced defense system had nearly started a nuclear war by mistake. The world moved on, unaware that it had ever come this close to ending. It would take more than a decade and the collapse of the Soviet Union itself before Stanislav Petrov's name reached the outside world. In the 1990s, as Cold War archives began to open, a former Soviet general mentioned the incident in his memoirs. The story slowly made its way into international media, and Petrov, by then an aging man living a modest life in a small apartment outside Moscow, found himself, decades late, being called a hero by people on the very side of the world he had once been trained to see as the enemy. He was invited to the United States. He stood at the United Nations. He met the very people whose lives, in a strange and quiet way, he had once held in his hands without their ever knowing it. He was given awards with names like the World Citizen Award, honored by organizations devoted to preventing nuclear catastrophe, and interviewed by journalists eager to understand how one man had managed to disobey the machine when everything told him to trust it. Petrov never described himself as a hero. In interview after interview, he insisted he had simply been doing his job, that he happened to be the right person, with the right training, sitting in that chair on that particular night. He often pointed out, with the same engineer's precision that had saved the world, that another officer without his technical background might have followed protocol exactly as written, and the outcome might have been catastrophically different. That, in many ways, is the most unsettling part of this story. The world was not saved that night by a system working as intended. It was saved by one man's willingness to trust his own judgment over the absolute certainty of a machine. A moment of very human doubt, standing between the world and total destruction. Stanislav Petrov passed away in 2017, largely outside the public eye once again, in the same quiet way he had lived most of his life. But the story of what he did in those 12 minutes has only grown more relevant with time, as modern militaries increasingly hand life and death decisions over to automated systems, artificial intelligence, and algorithms that promise certainty, but cannot promise wisdom. His story is a reminder that history is not only shaped by the loud, famous decisions made in public, but sometimes by silent, private ones made by ordinary people in rooms no one else will ever see. It's a reminder that behind every alarm, every system, every piece of technology we trust with enormous power, there needs to remain a human being willing to ask, is this really true? Somewhere in a quiet apartment outside Moscow, on an ordinary night in 1983, one tired engineer looked at a screen insisting the world was ending, trusted his own judgment instead, and chose not to make the call. Because of that choice, you are here to hear this story today. Thank you for watching America Beyond Origins. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. And if you want to keep discovering the America hidden history that never made it into your textbooks, hit subscribe, like this video, and stay for the next untold story waiting for you.